when I got there, we realized that they had a very hard time hiring talented traders. And so Zvi and I, Zvi Maushevitz is the person when I say Zvi, we're like, well, we know lots of people who could probably do this job. And so we realized that it was like perfectly built for Magic player skill sets. And so we tapped into the network, and I hired something like 30 Magic players over the course of the first 4 years there to build new products and to trade these sports, or these esports, as it were.
Welcome to another episode of the Football Analytics Show. My name is Ed Fang, your host. And on this episode, I'm thrilled to have Ted Knutson on. He is the CEO of StatsBomb. In this episode, we talk about his time as a sports bettor and also his over decade-long experience at Pinnacle Sportsbook. We also talk about the soccer analytics that he does at his company StatsBomb and what he thinks about the World Cup as we head into the quarterfinals. And finally, Ted tells us about the American football analytics that StatsBomb is starting to do. The Football Analytics Show is brought to you by the Power Ranks Sports Betting Newsletter. This is a free service that strives to be three things. 1, valuable. 2, concise. 3, entertaining. In the newsletter, I talk about college football and NFL bets that I made. Also, every Saturday, we send out a curated list of sports betting tips and news. If you sign up, I'll send you my top 5 sports betting podcast episodes and education through your ears. To check out this free service, go to thepowerrank.com. That is my site for better football betting through data and analytics. Once again, that's thepowerrank.com. Joining me on this episode of the Football Analytics Show is Ted Knutson. Right now, he is the CEO of StatsBomb, a very important sports data company. He also has a long history in the sports betting world and spent over a decade as doing bookmaking at Pinnacle. Ted, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Thanks for coming on. Ted, I really want to know more about your story. How did a guy from Oklahoma get into soccer data before he ever got into American football data?
So I actually grew up I was born just outside Chicago. My parents moved out into the boonies of Northwest Indiana, really. I think Purdue University was probably the closest university that near my high school. But honestly, it was like 10 miles through cornfields to get to my high school. So I'm actually an Indiana native that went to University of Oklahoma, and that's kind of where the Oklahoma stuff came. So I kind of cut my teeth on American football. I actually didn't play, and I say American football, I'm going to apologize ahead of time to the Americans in this audience. The other thing that we do is soccer, but my company is based in England. And so like when I say football, people just kind of like, which one do you mean? So we've kind of, they call it hand egg as well. So, it's slightly offensive. But yeah, so I was 1998 sitting on the couch. I was working nights at UPS loading trucks while at university, and the World Cup was on. And I watched that, and that was the France World Cup, and it was really kind of cool. And I was like, man, I kind of dig this sport. And I'd never played soccer at all. Like we didn't have it where I grew up out in the country at that time. Now it's everywhere in the US. And so like then plus the video game International Superstar Soccer on Nintendo 64 kind of like really sparked an interest there. And I fell in love with it. And I watched like the 2-hour Premier League recap on Fox Sports World for a couple of years. And it just grew and grew. And so that and college football were my two favorite sports. I was unfortunate enough to attend the University of Oklahoma, though, in 1994 to 1998, which was the least successful period ever in Oklahoma's footballing history, except for maybe this past season. So there we are.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But wait, when did Stoops come along and
the
take
year
Oklahoma?
after I left?
Oh, okay. So it really was you. Gotcha.
It was me.
Gotcha. Awesome. So you get into soccer during this time. How did you end up more on the betting side of things?
Let's see. So 2005, I was working, traveling the world and running a website for a silly card game called Magic the Gathering. And I was also like a big sports fan. And in fact, like the World Cups were always a time when I upgraded technology. So the 2002 World Cup, I got a DVR in order to record them because it happened in like Japan and Korea. And then the 2006 World Cup, I finally got like an HDTV in order to watch like better televised broadcasts and stuff like that. And so I was super passionate about that. But basically in 2005, a friend of mine, in fact, two friends of mine, were like, "Hey, we've had some success in gambling. Do you ever want to do any like data work on the background in order to be able to do this?" They're working on American sports, but we started to poke around it in soccer at the same time. And I was like, all right, this sounds really cool. And then I actually sort of left my job at that time in order to work with them in 2006. And so that was really the start of like kicking those things around in the analytics space, not just like looking at stats, but really started to take that seriously in a professional sense.
Okay. You were actually playing Magic the Gathering before this 2005, 2006 period?
I started playing Magic the Gathering when I showed up at university in 1994, but I got into the professional space in like 2002, 2003. I was lucky enough to start writing about the silly card game, and then eventually I got paid to travel around the world and cover the events like that people played for money by Wizards of the Coast. And I met some amazing people in that time.
That is amazing. So I've actually really been fascinated by Magic the Gathering. I see my son play it with his friend, and his friend is way more into it than he is. But then, Spanky had Antonino DeRosa on the show.
Oh, you had Ant on a show.
No, Spanky had Antonino on his podcast, and it really caught my attention that at one point Pinnacle Sportsbook was going to Magic the Gathering tournaments in order to recruit traders. And
you say Pinnacle was like literally that's me.
Yeah. Oh, that's you.
It's my fault. So Magic the Gathering, for those of you who don't know, is a card game that's a bit of a combination between Dungeons and Dragons and poker and chess in like a very abstracted way. It's as if if the rules in chess introduced new pieces, say 3 times a year, and then you had to keep that up, and sometimes it retired old pieces as well. Like that's kind of what this game is like, and so it has a long history of producing people that are very skilled in mathematics, but also in dealing with incomplete information puzzles. And for those of you who are kind of in the gambling space, or the reality is sports analytics is also gambling in the exact same way. You're looking at probabilistic things around sport. The fact that you can deal with incomplete information problems is exactly what you do in gambling every day, and it's what you do with recruitment or drafting or lines or how do we play against this team. All of that stuff is the same sort of thing, and so if you're used to it, you're able to build a skill set that you can adapt to different areas.
I mean, it seems like a load of different areas, right? I mean, we'll be talking a lot about sports betting, but it seems like many of these card players end up going into finance or hedge funds or all that stuff, right?
Yeah, final tables at the World Series of Poker, other games and sports betting.
Absolutely. So you got into the game in the early 90s, and then how did it come about that you started covering it?
I was bored. I liked traveling. I hated my job at the time, and eventually, I'd been writing enough on some of these websites to get paid regularly to write about these card games. And then I sent a few emails to the people that were running the coverage teams, and I was like, "Hey, if you have any slots, like I will happily volunteer to do this." And I was well known enough at the time. They're like, "All right, come meet us in." God, it was like Kansas City or something like that for nationals, and we'll do that. And that turned into getting to go to Japan on the company dime like 10 times in 4 years, and Australia and France and England and all of this stuff, plus, 25, 30 weekends around the United States.
And this was like you were just a Magic the Gathering writer.
I was a writer. I also ran one of the big websites called StarCityGames.com, and that put me in touch with tons of Magic players. And that led into when Pinnacle when I worked at Pinnacle, I started basically spring of 2007. So after UGA had hit, we no longer could bet from inside the United States because all the laws had changed. You couldn't move money between books and your bank account. And so those of us who had been working on this sort of mini hedge fund slash syndicate betting independently, we were like, what do we do? And so we had to leave the country, but we had done enough sort of relationship work with the managing director of Pinnacle that he's like, look, we need to completely rebuild our product profile from the United States facing to the rest of the world facing. If you guys are interested in doing this, come work for us. When I got there, we realized that they had a very hard time hiring talented traders. And so Zvi and I, Zvi Maushevitz is the person, when I say Zvi, we're like, well, we know lots of people who could probably do this job. And so we realized that it was like perfectly built for Magic player skill sets. And so we tapped into the network, and I hired something like 30 Magic players over the course of the first 4 years there to build new products and to trade these sports, or these esports, as it were.
And were you happy with your decision to target Magic the Gathering players?
Oh yeah, we crushed. Like they were exactly what we needed, and so many of them had like really long lifetimes at Pinnacle, and then some of them like Antonino, and actually quite a few others now, have gone off into the rest of the gambling world and continued to be very successful.
Absolutely. If you were a 45-year-old data scientist, that does a lot of betting, and you wanted to kind of expand your horizons, would you still recommend that person like play some Magic the Gathering? Like, can someone later on in life still kind of reap the benefits from thinking about that game?
Oh, I think that you can reap the benefits from lots of different games. And I think as you get older, you should still continue to find new things and be malleable. For example, like I still play lots of different games. Most of us are lifetime gamers, whether those are, board games with friends or your kids. And, you're trying to like figure out the new rules and figure out which things are broken. Or, I mean, for the past month, I've been learning how to play Teamfight Tactics, which is the Riot sort of strategy game. I've never played before, and I'm terrible at it, but I like learning new games and new rules because it teaches you, when I approach a new market, like how do I sort of distill all this information into something sensible? How do I research and get better faster? I think these are lifetime skills. These are not sort of, never give up. Like you'll probably be doing this stuff at 75. You just might be, whatever modern bridge happens to be at that time.
For sure. Teamfight Tactics, is that a board game? Is it a video game?
It's a video game. It's by the makers of League of Legends. I play a lot of Hearthstone and Hearthstone Battlegrounds, which are sort of the auto battlers. So like these are all strategic ones that you give me things to chew on when things are a little struggly at work, or you're irritated, or really you just want to take your brain in a different direction.
Absolutely. Yeah, I've never been much of a gamer, but I feel like it's an area that I should probably get out of my comfort zone a little bit.
And that's super important, right? Like allowing yourself to feel uncomfortable is key to building new skill sets and new knowledge.
Absolutely. And then just the added benefit. I mean, I feel like, my 11-year-old doesn't, he does productive stuff over the summer, but maybe not as much as he should on a day-to-day basis. So I've actually told him that he is going to go play Magic with his friends. And so maybe I'll get on that, get in on that. So, and then it's an opportunity to play a game and then spend time with family too. Right.
Oh, and as they get older, like it's so important to find ways that you can interact with them on territory that they want to talk to you about. Cause like so many times they're passionate about a few things, and then that doesn't necessarily include anything that you care about. And you're like, well, I don't want to lose my kid interactivity here. So I'm going to have to bend a bit. Like these are good ways.
Well, with him, I'm pretty lucky because he's really passionate about soccer.
Aha.
So we do have a lot to talk about there. But no, I mean, I need to. Yeah, I mean, I think we all need to stretch our horizons, and that seems like a somewhat low hanging fruit, right? Just if we both have interest in it. Ted, I want to go back to the time I think around 2005. You were betting with some partners, right?
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about like how you approached your betting there in terms of looking at what parts of the market in order to bet other aspects of the market that might not have been as strong?
So I will say that these are things that happened 17 years ago. And so They may not apply to current times. In some cases, because we literally changed the world when we got inside the books as opposed to outside of it. So back then, a lot of the things that we did were on derivative pricing things. So first halves, team totals in baseball, money lines in basketball, derivative lines, that type of stuff. And the world had not really figured out the maths very well in these things. They had pricing that had holes in it. Some people were like professional middlers back then. We were not that, but we did a lot of other things that were kind of around that. But the other thing that we had going was we were elite handicappers in American football. Seth continues to be, an NFL handicapper that has 2+ decades of profitability in the NFL, and I was a 55% against the spread for a long time in college football. I don't know if I could replicate that again, but the last time that I did it was probably 2013. So it was a while ago. But yeah, that's pretty darn good. Like that means you're holding, 10, 11, 12%, which is awesome over the course of, 100 plus bets in the season. And that was on spreads. So like, there are other bets that you could do. And so, yeah, our approach was like, look at the markets, figure out the places that might have holes. V is an awesome mathematician. And so he would do a lot of the maths work on like equivalencies. And so anytime we found regular holes where, the spread and the total would like move and then somebody would lag their other stuff or like they just had the wrong price on it, we would happily take that as value. It's not picking them off necessarily. It's just that was what was available to us. But then we also backed it up with some pretty large, substantial bets on sides in the sports that we understood very well.
Awesome. Yeah. So Ryan O'Hanlon talks a little bit about it in Net Gains, right? Where, I think you were looking at the spread and the total in an NBA game and looking at places where the money line might be off. And I think the idea is like there's just less volume in that money line market, right? So it could potentially be off, and you guys took advantage of that. Just what you're saying with like the pricing of derivative markets.
Right. Because like, so say an NFL team is a 7-point favorite this week. The way that we actually rebuilt Pinnacle was that, they already had some of their alternate lines. Some of those were not quite exactly where we'd price them, but you want to give people the ability to buy lots of different prices or sell lots of different prices. So you're like, all right, I think they're actually better than a 7-point favorite. I think they're a 10-point favorite. So like, I'll go to 9.5 and I'll reap the benefit of some extra juice on this or the flip side. So, a higher payout, et cetera. And that's like one of the things that made Pinnacle into the best place in the world to bet. And we did this across lots of different sports. So we changed the game of tennis, and we did all sorts of new type, derivative props around tennis that then, everybody looks at it as like, oh, this is a much better way to bet. And then, another thing that we did at Pinnacle was, 2008, like I took it upon myself to build live betting there at the behest of Henry, who was the managing director. And I had to fight for a year to get us to put up every single NBA game and every single Major League Baseball game in running. We did it at commercial breaks. You didn't want to get picked off. But we also did it. We did it on 4% margins. So like less than Vegas margins. 108 was what we were doing then. And we had winning products. Like we built winning products in live betting in 2008, and we did it in soccer as well. And so that's kind of like the OG stuff that we did that, a lot of people talk about, but we did it early. We did, Asia was there, Bet365 was there, and it was us. And we did it on amazing margins and we won. That was something I'm really proud of.
That's amazing because you can't even sniff that kind of hold on an in-game market in the NFL right now. Oh, I mean, maybe at Pinnacle, I haven't checked, but like certainly not any of the square books available in the United States.
The NFL was the hardest of those sports to really build because the inflection points are so high. I remember the last season that I traded live there, I think might have been the start of 2014, but it was certainly the full 2013 season. And Shiano was coaching, I think, Tampa Bay at the time. And they had a couple of games that I'm sure that were like 95% win probability at the end of it, and we still had to post things, and they end up losing, and you're like, oh my god, this is insane. And you're just trying to like weather those late game swings and stuff. And I know that there's like this Haralabob he's on stage at Sloan in like 2013, maybe 2010, I don't know.
I was in there.
with the Cantor gaming guy,
Yeah.
and I just
Yeah.
felt so bad for that dude. But also, like, Bob was talking about all the things that we did at Pinnacle that, like, the Vegas books never do. And I was like, wow, it's like I'm in the room, even though I'm actually having to work this weekend.
I mean, that was one of the most epic encounters in the history of Sloan, because Matthew Holt, who was at Cantor, kind of said some ridiculous things like we'll take huge bets from anyone. And of course, sharps like Bob Vulgarish, called him out on that.
I don't believe you.
Yeah, I mean, not that I don't believe you. I believe the statement is I have personal evidence that this is not true. And, Bob Vulgarish, obviously, he is strongly opinionated with a lot of his beliefs too. So it was definitely, it was definitely an epic encounter. And, I remember that was a year. Like, I think I said a couple words to Bob at the bar at the Hilton right outside the convention center that year. So that was definitely, that was a heck of a Sloan.
He now owns a soccer team.
He does.
Castellon.
Yeah, and I hear that set pieces are a big part of what he's doing. So
Bob's very smart and also knows some other smart people.
I would guess that would be the case. Yeah, we'll get into that in a sec. I do want to say, like, you were talking about like pricing of derivative markets and things. Maybe those types of ideas. Well, those ideas certainly worked for you 17 years ago or however long ago it was. I believe that those things still work in the markets today, especially as some of these square books put out a lot of markets. And, some of them make a lot of mistakes. So I do believe that those ideas are still useful.
See, I just want to be clear on something. I don't think those are mistakes, right? Like, they have posted bets that they are willing to take wagers on, and they're not clearly wrong to everybody else, right? And so, like, I just want to, because the books get angry about someone picking off their mistakes. Now, mistakes are things that somebody is accidentally totally mispriced. Like, something should have been minus 200 and it came out plus 200 or something like that. These are just wagers. They're like, I want any square person to bet on either side of this, and I'm probably fine. And you're like, well, these are clearly wrong. They're offering value on one side or another.
Right. So let's not call them mistakes. Let's call, basically, some of these square books are putting out so many markets out there that there's an opportunity to use the strongest markets, right, like NFL sides and totals, to bet this wide range of markets that this book has put out.
Sure, and as an entity that has lots of trading markets, because you want to entice as many customers as possible, it is impossible to have full knowledge of all of these markets. And so, people that have deep expertise in some leagues and things that people don't understand very well, like, they are able to profit. And that's where the game of skill of sports betting comes in. The embarrassing thing is so many of the sort of square books have tried to take that away or price it in such a way that, they don't want people that have skill betting there, which then, it makes it a false economy in my mind.
Yeah, for sure. And no one listening to this is going to agree with any of these books that are limiting sharp bettors. But
sorry, I come from a different world, so I just wanted to be really clear. People hear bookie, and I'm like, no. We are different.
No, you ran a bunch of things at Pinnacle. I just want to ask, you talked about how Pinnacle was changing and going from a U.S. facing book to more of the world. And if I understand correctly from Net Gains, the book, you were a big part in maybe starting or growing the soccer betting markets there.
Yeah, so growing. I came in and it was pretty disorganized, and because I was the guy that really loved soccer, like, that became very natural and easy to do. They're like, oh, okay, so you like this, and can you find us more talented traders, and can we build a live product? And I didn't do it by myself. I just want to be clear. Like, we had lots of talented people. Marco Bluma, who was the director of trading for a long time, came after me, but he was the guy that I hired. Dirk Baborowski, I think, is still there and incredibly smart and has built a lot of that live product as well. And it's, some of those guys have continued to be around for a long time. So it was really fun. We learned a lot. We made some really dumb mistakes, but I think at the end of the day, we also made hundreds of millions in profit at the time that I was there. And the first year that I was there, we lost 6 million. So, kind of a big change in what we were able to do.
And now when I look at the Pinnacle markets and compare in soccer, so let's take win, loss, draw probability in a World Cup game. The Pinnacle hold is like 2%, 2.5, 2 point something percent. And that is really small, even compared to other sharp books out there. So would you say, like, in some sense, like losing money that first year kind of helped grow a system where, you guys are, putting on a market, moving on sharp action and getting to the right price, right? Like, obviously there were lessons learned, but like, the markets that Pinnacle offer are incredible at this point, especially for big things like the World Cup. And it seems like that all started with the work that you guys did.
Yeah, I think a lot of that's true. They had done things before, but it didn't have the scale. It didn't have the depth of markets. It's just about continuing to build. The losses at the book level were not really our fault or our responsibility. It happened because of other things, and they cashed out a bunch of money because they didn't know what was going to happen after 2006 and stuff. And then, but yeah, then it was really about they gave us time to build these things and some tech, although I don't think they realized like how how much tech debt they had, and we had probably, I don't know, 3 or 4 or 5 years of stuff that we could build by the time that I left, and they just really needed to invest in the IT side of things. People would for years be like, "Oh yeah, Pinnacle's down again on a Saturday or a Sunday," and you're like wanted to vomit all over your shoes because it's so valuable to have the lines up then.
Of course. So, Ted, tell me a little bit more about how you phased out of Pinnacle and then started getting into the data side of things with StatsBomb.
So my wife in 2014, we had 2 small children. I think they were 3 and 4. And she had a very clear conversation with me that said, it would be nice if you were around on weekends to help raise our children. And I said, thank you for that very clear communication, because anybody who has worked in sports betting or alongside a sports bettor realizes that their weekend time is basically non-existent. And so with kids that were getting ready to go to school, it felt like that should change. So I went and looked for a job in basically soccer analytics, because I'd been writing about that. I have done a lot of writing off and on over my career, partly because I like the process. It helps me learn things, partly because I like communicating. So anyway, someone had read it, and I ended up working for a guy named Matthew Benham. For those of you who haven't heard of Matthew Benham, he was the founder of the Smart Odds sort of hedge fund / syndicate, one of the world's most successful sports betting syndicates for a long period of time. And that allowed him to buy 2 football teams or 2 soccer teams, one named Brentford, that was in League One when I joined them, and then another named Midtjylland, which is a sometimes champion of Denmark at this point, but had not won a title back in 2014.
Yeah, that's awesome. So how did that relationship start?
I was I was meeting somebody who was kind of doing assistant director of football work for him at a pub across the street from their offices. And I was just chatting about what could be done with, data and analytics and finding, good young players and prospects. And he just showed up. And then we kind of hit it off because some of the people in the industry that we knew, we both had an equal distaste for, which is always good. Like, if you like the same people, great. But if you dislike the same people, that's where you really bond. So, yeah. So Matthew and I, he's like, all right, cool. Well, we need this. Let's do this. I think that there's something there as well. And then spent 2 years, building all that information, working for them. And then came out the other side of it in 2016, and I was like, all right, well, this seems like this project's on hold a bit. What do I want to do next? And I went to a software developer, and I was like, hey, these are the tools I want to build for my next job, assuming that it would be in a soccer team. And quickly, within like a couple months, realized that every team was going to need this. This was the Moneyball moment for soccer. It was going to catch fire. This was 2016. And if we built these products so that everybody could use them, like maybe there's a real company and a real growth trajectory in that, as opposed to working inside of a team.
Absolutely. And is this technology, the computer vision stuff, that has helped you come up with these expected goal models?
So the first thing that we did was we were like, all right, the company's called StatsBomb. It was a blog in 2013, so it went from a blog into a company into a worldwide leader in the soccer data space and now in the American football space. And the first thing that we did was we built these tools that help you do recruitment, because recruitment is the most valuable thing that you do in any team, but particularly in soccer, where you can literally buy and sell players for money. And so we built those tools because I had done like all of that work. So we understood it really well and very quickly realized that the data could be made better. And so designed new data to be both the best in the gambling space and the best in the sort of player analysis skill set recruitment space at the same time. And so that launched in 2018. And then we've continued to upgrade that. We've added some computer vision elements. And then we've added live. And then I think in the pandemic, I started working on the research to launch an American football product. And so that's kind of where we ended up. And it kind of tells you like how long it takes to do these things sometimes.
Oh, for sure, right? And you guys have a huge team. I mean, it's not like you and some other small group, right? Like StatsBomb has a really big team working on all these data services.
Yeah, we've got 4 different data products. We also label all of our own computer vision AI stuff. I think we've got like almost 900 people that work in the company across all the different layers of stuff. We've got 200 customers in soccer around the world, and we have 1 customer in American football, but that's going to change a bunch in the next couple months.
That is excellent. Ted, would it be possible to give a sense for like what kind of data, when you were talking about these acquisitions, like what kind of data were you dealing with in like 2014 when that kind of first started?
Yeah, so in some cases it was very poor quality data, but having some data was better than none if nobody else was doing that work. So the land of the blind, one-eyed man is king, and that was what was that was what was possible back then. But then as you continued on, you realize that they're just these big holes. And so former U.S. national team head coach Bob Bradley like had complaints about the data and stuff we didn't know, and you're like, well, Bob, that's sort of true, but like we could still do a lot with it. It's just around, passing and shots, but you didn't know where the goalkeeper was. You didn't know where the defender was. You didn't know who was doing pressures, the footedness of the passes. There were all these little things that we could upgrade and be able to build as long as we kind of controlled our whole process.
Yeah, for sure. So, and then the computer vision stuff came along pre-pandemic.
Yeah. So our computer vision, in the shots was, I think, in 2018. And then the fully computer vision product that we offer, which is sort of contextual event data called StatsBomb 360, we launched it in March of 2021. And now probably end of 2023, we'll have tracking data that'll be computer vision generated for soccer. The American football product is sort of ahead of that right now in that it's learned a lot from the mistakes, but my God, what a beast that sport is.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I'm really excited that, you guys are doing a lot of American football. But first, like real quick, just, with StatsBomb, I think if anyone who's listening to this has seen anything, it would be like the expected goals, the XG that's available right now on FBref, one of the sports reference sites. So why is your XG so much better than other ones out there?
Thoughtfulness
Okay.
and data science. So when we first started, we were told, oh, these things would be too hard to collect. And we're like, all right, well, what if we just spent the time to do it? And so we started collecting the position of the goalkeeper on every shot. And then we very quickly was like, well, we can collect the defenders as well and the attackers potentially on those. And what you find out is like having a goalkeeper and the guy who can use his hands in the way of shots is very strong element. And is that likely to be a goal or not, particularly when they're absent? So that was the first big upgrade. And I think the reality is nobody still does that to the level that we do, just on those basic things. Pardon me. And then we added in the height of the shot, or what we call shot impact height. Just thinking, like we put this in the data before anybody had any research on it, but just thinking that, hey, this might have an impact on whether things are likely to turn into a goal or not as well. And that, again, is an upgrade that we have proven to be quite valuable and useful. And so now, across millions of shots in the data set, men's and women's soccer, Like we just have consistently the things that feel most accurate and the things that are probably most predictive in your data science models around like, should this shot be a goal or not?
Right. So the shot height, is it better to shoot low where it's hard for the keeper to dive, or is it better to shoot high?
So in general, that would be like the endpoint height, and it should be low. It's harder for keepers to get down low, especially if you're putting in the corners. The impact height is like where it is on your body, and what we found there
Right.
was that very high headers, you're probably skimming off the top of your head, so like that has some element, and is this likely to be a goal? And then really, it's about if the ball is on the ground, it is more likely to be a goal than anywhere else, and so that sort of says that if you are going you need to be able to create really good chances and have like very good delivery in order to score things that are not on the ground, and that's challenging as well. So these are little elements inside of it, but eventually talk about compounding gains, like it adds up to just better probability to win over the course of a season.
Yeah, absolutely. So I completely get, like, if the ball's coming in high, if it's coming off your head, that's a lower probability than if the ball's near the ground and you actually get your foot on it, right? Which you can generate more power and more accuracy, and that's part of. I mean, we've known that for a while, and I think that was early work that you did, right?
Yeah.
So if you're practicing set pieces, like, why don't you run plays where you can get your best player with his foot on the ball instead of his head?
So set pieces are one of the few times that the box is particularly crowded. And so in those situations, like we will run some, but you can only do that occasionally. It's like you can't do the same tactic over and over again. In the NFL, you have to have a variety of plays that you run. This is the same sort of concept around it. But the nice part about most defending for set pieces in soccer, meaning corners, in some cases, like we go out of our way to create long throws that are the Danish called hand corners at some point. But the nice part is the defense will usually defend in a similar way each time, which then gives you the opportunity to sort of find ways to exploit that defense.
Right. Interesting. Okay, so it's just hard to consistently have a play where you're off a corner where your player is getting a foot on the ball. But at least there should be some, right? And
yeah,
I feel like I don't see any.
We teach it. There aren't that many people that do exactly our type of stuff. But we did teach it for a while. We actually stopped doing that course because it was so valuable, and we wanted the people that kind of are part of our family tree to have some longevity in what they learn. But you can do it sometimes, and it is super valuable. And so that is, if you get the opportunity, you should definitely exploit those.
Absolutely. Now, I have a question that might make me look really stupid, but I'm going to ask it anyways. Are you allowed to set a pick in soccer?
Sort of. It depends on what the ref decides to call. It depends on how obvious it is. You could do a lot of them in subtle ways. Technically, the strict interpretation of the rules is that you probably shouldn't, but technically you're not allowed to grab another player either, and we see that happen all the time.
Right.
So.
Okay. So technically, you're not allowed to set a pick, but that's also true in the NFL. So there's a lot of offensive schemes where there's these rub routes, and like, why don't we see that more in set pieces?
I think you probably will, but also remember that the vast majority of people that create set pieces, especially the ones that you are watching, are not American football trained or basketball trained for that matter.
Right, but isn't that a huge opportunity?
I agree.
Okay. Right. I mean, because like I watch these things, right? You watch set pieces, and we always talk, in the analytics world, we're talking about how do you get more value out of set pieces. And, there's a nice ESPN article that talked about Bob Voulgaris and the soccer club he bought and how he's doing that. And I agree with that. But then I look at set pieces and it just looks like, well, it looks like the old fashioned thing where there's like five guys trying to descend. You get your center backs up there and there's five guys trying to descend on the box and get a header on it. Whereas, like, doesn't it make more sense to kind of like pick away? Like in basketball, you always talk about picking away, right? So why don't you have some players picking away, getting your best player to the near post and maybe getting his foot on it?
Most people that are doing this, if they have a full-time coach on it, are still not great. it's still pretty early in that period of time. Like think of the NFL, in the 80s when
In
passing was a thing, but it wasn't like this, right?
in the 80s?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Okay. So I'm not crazy in anything that I've said. Like it all sounds somewhat reasonable.
There are some very sharp teams out there. I think the U.S. women's national team did a very good job in the last World Cup of exploiting set pieces in a very good way. I think that in some cases, like the sport, especially on the men's side, is still changing. The Italian team that won Euros employed my mentor named Gianni Vio as part of their crew. He now works at Tottenham. But yeah, it's pretty early on.
I find that insane. But then again, I guess I believe. I certainly believe that like soccer analytics is maybe 20 years behind baseball.
We didn't start talking about set pieces until 2016, and it's mostly my fault.
Okay, well, we'll blame you for the lack of progress. But
some people who had this edge or like came behind me from the clubs, like they wish that we never talked about it. So there you go.
Interesting. That's fascinating. Ted, is there a World Cup bet that you'd be willing to share with us based on your experience, data, knowledge?
So historically, even up to 2018, I was still sort of quite involved in the gambling space. So for a long time, and I always had good World Cup bets. And then over the last few years, I really decided to take a step back, partly because we have a lot of sort of sports betting hedge funds or gambling syndicates that take our data. I figured that it makes more sense to make sure that you don't irritate them as long-term customers by going out there and talking about this stuff. So I do not bet. I have no wagers that I've made in years because of kind of maintaining a separation of church and state. Could I ever go back? Possibly. And often the dogs are the best bets in the World Cups for a very long time. I will say that there's a team from North Africa that we have worked with some, and it's been very exciting to see their progress. And that is at least as exciting as having actual wagers on those games.
Yeah, absolutely. I can definitely see that from your perspective. We're about to reach the quarterfinals of the World Cup. Brazil is still our favorite, and I feel like they get a pretty easy matchup against an old Croatia team in the quarterfinals. We still have France as a very strong team, Argentina. Any thoughts about who might be lifting the World Cup trophy in a week?
No, I think the quarterfinals are really interesting, and that France-England one is like two juggernauts, very talented. It could go either way. Brazil, I think Croatia's pretty crafty. It is good that they got Neymar back and he seems to be healthy, and they finally had kind of a breakout game where they scored a bunch of goals, which it feels like it's been ages since they did that. Spain going out, huge swing on that one. Germany also going out. So there are some what feel like soft matchups, but one of the fun parts about soccer is that the upsets happen somewhat regularly, especially in knockout tournaments. So we'll see.
Yeah. You talked about the team from North Africa. Do you feel like Morocco can pull off another one against what I think is an absurdly talented Portugal team?
It's a big ask. We'll see.
Yeah. Awesome.
Try to stay out of trouble here.
Gotcha. So Ted, when I was looking into what StatsBomb was doing before talking to you today, I was thrilled to see that you guys have made the leap into American football. It seems like you're focusing more on the college game, but tell us what you are doing in American football.
So we actually collect both NFL and college, and we've created a data spec that we, again, same sort of thing that we did in soccer, which is what are all the missing things inside of current data that's available, whether that's from PFF or SIS, or even to a very minor extent, what's available from Next Gen Stats. And so we designed this from scratch, and we designed all the collection around it. And then we started to figure out, all right, so if we layer in computer vision, like what can we do? How do we power this? How do we make sure that it doesn't take us 150 hours per game in order to collect this from a manpower or person power perspective? So that's what we ended up doing. Right now, the base data, I think, has about 10 times as much data as sort of a PFF. It's much better at helping evaluate offensive and defensive line play. And there's a bunch of things inside of it as well. We've got the XYZ on where the ball came from or came to the wide receiver. So you're going to get better information about kind of quarterback targeting on his own receivers and stuff like that. And yeah, so that's the base data. And then behind it, we have a tracking product that it should roll out in Q1 of 2023 that will have physical data incorporated and frame by frame tracking for everybody on the field.
That's super cool. So so you're doing okay. So let's talk about like the frame by frame tracking in the NFL. Like in principle, Next Gen Stats has all that, right? Because I think they're tracking players based on technology in the pads, right?
Absolutely, and it's really hard to improve the NFL's data, especially on a broad scale. In some cases, we use that as the gold standard. What we did, though, was we added some things that they didn't have. So, the Z on the ball is a thing that they don't have, like the placement there, like on the receiver's body. They also don't have what we call engagements. So they do have tracking data, and they can tell when somebody, two players are near to each other. We actually collect a line battle engagement as, this player is blocking or attempting to block this player. He has his hands on him. And then, what happens in those situations? And so you're getting combo blocks out of that type of stuff. You're getting double teams. And from a player's perspective, there are these defensive tackles that some systems need where they just eat gaps and eat double teams and not move, right? So that's the key part. And the reality is, that's a non-event for the most part. Like what happened there? Well, that dude stood there and he didn't move, but he had two guys on him at the time. So that's actually a super valuable skill set because it allows your linebackers who are super mobile to get involved. And so we tried to think of ways that we could make sure that we were collecting that information and put that into the data set. And so that's something that's there to help evaluate both offensive and defensive line play that we don't think has really existed before, and certainly not in this way.
For sure. So PFF is grading every player, but well, first of all, if you're doing the computer vision, it should be more objective and a little bit less subjective, right?
We're too dumb to grade players. That's like way too dumb. Like we're not even going to pretend that we know what they were supposed to do on a particular player or anything like that. It's not to say that we haven't been in the room. I embedded with University of Miami and Manny Diaz's crew for an entire college season in order to learn from them. And I have a lifetime of sort of not only following the game, but being very good at actually gambling on college football. But, I'm not going to pretend that I'm an elite talent evaluator because I've done it for different sports and I know how hard it is.
Yeah, for sure. So the, is there a metric that's come out of this kind of line of scrimmage battle that you guys are doing that you could tell like an average fan about right now?
Yeah, so I think the line battle stuff is probably the most exciting and new. We're able to get, people collect pressure as like an event, and it's sort of like, is the quarterback under pressure or not? We've got a thing that we call proximity pressure, which is literally how close did a defender get to the quarterback at any point? And we've got all the defenders, right? So you kind of get this concept of, they've got a passing bubble around them. What does the pocket look like, et cetera? And, how quickly are these things happening? Where are teams able to create pressure through the gaps anywhere or, through a particular set of players? Are you having more success right side versus left side against different schemes? Is there a tight end there that you want to, and how does that impact their pressure that they're conceding or giving up? But it's proximity pressure. So it's not someone saying, oh, there was pressure. It's literally how close are they getting to the quarterback in a period of time?
Right. And so, that's clearly really important. I would guess that once you look at that data, you're going to find that quarterbacks probably control a lot of that pressure in terms of their read and getting rid of the ball. But it's also, in some sense, other people track that, right? But you're just doing it in a better way by looking at exactly how far certain defenders get to the quarterback.
We're creating objective information around this, and we're doing it in a sense that the teams care about. So, like, how do we create information? How do we visualize that? One of the first things that people got excited about in the team space was like just these really simple passing heat maps, right? And sometimes you see, oh wow, they very rarely use the middle of the field, but they use a lot of like outside passes, like say, Josh Allen is very capable as a long passer. Jimmy Garoppolo, to the sidelines or not. We have the actual exact distance from where the quarterback's feet were to the point that it hits the wide receiver's hands. So you get actual air distance, not just sort of vertical air yards down the field. The NFL has this, but in the college space, it's totally different. And so this combination of info about offensive, defensive line, and then everything that we can package in by having all the locations of the players, where they line up on any particular scheme set, et cetera, is that's the first layer of stuff. You help build better player skill sets, and then the second layer is using machine learning and AI to auto categorize plays, so that the time that people on the graduate staff or even in the NFL, they spend classifying plays as different stuff inside of their schemes is massive every single week, right? It's 20, 40, 60 hours, maybe more, depending on what your staffs look like.
Yeah.
Well, if we can get that right at sort of a 90, 95% clip and save you a ton of work, like that's pretty exciting, because you get a lot more sort of thinking time and scheming time when you get that stuff at the beginning of the week where you can put it into an action plan.
Absolutely. The raw data that you guys are working with are like the video of the actual game. Is that correct?
That's correct. We do everything off of video.
And then, with the NFL, there's probably more cameras on a game, right? They have the all 22 cameras. And then, so you're potentially getting a richer data set in the NFL than, maybe like a Sun Belt game in which you can only get an ESPN Plus broadcast.
All of college has all 22. It's a matter of getting agreements with the schools or the conferences in order to use that video.
Oh, interesting. Awesome. And what about down to the FCS level?
We haven't gotten that far yet, because honestly, that's a level of scale that we can't quite touch. The 32 plus 135 or whatever it is now in FBS and NFL, that's enough for now. But in a couple of years' time, like dealing with the hundreds of FCS teams is someplace that we'll go.
Well, I think it's 100.
Well, if you follow Bill Connolly, then you see Division sort of 2 and Division 3, and you realize that there are 500 extra teams down there.
Yeah. But you can only, right now you can bet on the FCS teams, so and not necessarily, the Division 2 teams yet. So we'll get there eventually. Ted, I like to end the show with some potentially non-sports questions. What's your favorite book?
It's a little problematic because of the author these days, but Ender's Game for years and years is my favorite book. And then on the nonfiction side, one of the best ones I've read in recent times is The Hard Thing About Hard Things by Ben Horowitz.
Excellent. So Ender's Game is probably the most popular answer I've gotten.
Wow.
And that it's at least been 3 guests, and I might be forgetting. Obviously the things have changed with I'm not exactly sure what the author did, but there's been some things there. Tell me more about the Horowitz book.
It's sort of a business book and sort of a life book. Actually, Kyle Bodie, who runs Driveline, I think was the first person I saw recommend it. And it's just really powerful about all the hard stuff that you need to do and the way to approach it in running a business. And man, running a business is the hardest thing that I'll probably ever do. It feels endlessly daunting and impossible.
Interesting. So that much harder than trading at Pinnacle?
Yeah, I was really good at that. I'm never sure if I'm really good at running a business.
Wow. But yet StatsBomb continues to grow and get into new sports, and it seems like everything's going pretty well.
Yeah, but you got to stay humble every day, or the world will do it for you.
No, for sure. But don't you feel like it might be more important to stay humble as a bettor, where things will certainly go bad, and that's just part of being a bettor?
I do. I think that was a natural inherited mindset. But it's a framework that doesn't throw a billion different new things to you. A job that's running a business, you have to deal with humans on a regular basis at first, which is highly complicated. You then deal with things like accountancy, but also marketing, but also sales go-to-market, but also product, but also tech. It is just endless in the new stuff that it'll throw at you.
Right. And you got into this business so that you could spend more time with your children on weekends, right? And you don't want to infringe on that time as well, right?
It's true. I'm sure that it has infringed on that time, but also it's given us a lot of opportunities. So that's pretty good.
Yeah, absolutely. So do you feel like this book kind of helps you prioritize? Is that in terms of what you should focus on with being an entrepreneur?
Yeah, I think that's part of it. Like you will constantly encounter hard things, and it's just like some of the best distilled advice that you're going to get in that space.
Awesome. Ted, how about your best culinary experience?
Oh, I've had a ton of these, and I am incredibly lucky. But I also seek them out. So it's creating your own luck surface area type of concept. I think the best one that I've had was 11 Madison Park after they were awarded either their second or their third star. Yeah, I had just this unbelievable meal, and it was with some amazing friends of mine. I also went there with my wife. So yeah, back in those days, I could not believe how incredible it was, and so that was my best, purely culinary experience.
And I just presume from the name 11 Madison Park that it's in New York City.
It is, yeah. It was voted the best restaurant in the world a couple of times.
Oh wow! And what kind of cuisine is it?
I think at that time it was somewhat avant-garde and sort of culinary gastronomy type stuff. But these days they've gone fully vegetarian, and there's been some backlash around that. And I'm not sure. I haven't been back yet, but I would like to. I'm not anti-vegetarian.
Yeah, no, that sounds fascinating, right? I mean, I'm sure they had a good reason for going full vegetarian, but I mean, it sounds like a challenge to
Right,
keep your status.
and if there's anybody that can pull it off, then maybe it's them.
That's awesome. Do you have any go-to resources for finding culinary experiences?
So Infatuation, I quite like. They're pretty honest about stuff. I use them for when I was in Miami. I use them for Miami, London, New York. Timeout and Eater, both really good. Like those are the ones that when I travel, like I'll just see, what things are recommended in different cities and which ones aren't too far away. And I do go out to eat when I travel a lot because I have to. It's the carrot that gets me on a plane, which is the most boring thing ever.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm a huge fan of Eater, and I actually just had a friend in town this past weekend, and I was kind of proud of myself because instead of just taking him to Apparatus Room in Detroit, which I know would be good, and I know we'd be happy, and it's great. I decided to branch out and try something new, and there were a couple of kind of like those high end places that we like to go to that weren't open on a Sunday. So we ended up going to a place called Oak and Reel, and it was kind of billed as a pasta and seafood place, which is not the type of restaurant that I'm raising my hand to go to. Mm-hmm. But we went, we got the tasting menu and the pairing with wine, and it was phenomenal. It was really phenomenal, and not
and those situations where you find it like unexpectedly great is awesome. But I will also crush a Detroit pizza that's good any day of the week. Somehow Detroit ended up with the best variety of American pizza, and I adore it.
Yeah, they really do. Have you been to Supino?
I don't go to Detroit at all. I eat Detroit pizza that gets out of Detroit. Really.
Got it. All right. Well, if you're ever around. So there's Detroit pizza, and that's what's kind of left in the left the area, and I know it's popular in Pittsburgh, and it kind of comes from kind of the deep dish square pizza,
red top type stuff.
Yeah. So that's by far not the best pizza in Detroit.
Oh.
Supino is, I mean, my favorite pizza I've ever had. The story is that the proprietor made pizza dough in his KitchenAid every night for 7 years. And the result is the dough, and it's I don't know, it's pretty amazing. That kind of dedication kind of pays off, and really good with their toppings. Just really take care of all that stuff. And then now I'm actually not really sure whether that's the best pizza in Detroit, because there's a place called Pie Side, which is kind of looks a little bit more like the Detroit deep dish, but they also do like a really good job with ingredients.
It's awesome that you're spoiled for this choice, right? And like that's exactly the best thing in the world. Some places like have just genuinely horrible pizza, and that's right. All you get. So you have one more question on here that I'm really excited to answer, and it is related to dinner.
Oh, awesome! Well, let's get to it. If you could have dinner with any one person, dead or alive, who would it be?
So I've already lived this, and I wanted to just say how incredibly lucky and fortunate I am with my life. So there was one dinner that Jeff Ma put together at End of Sloan a couple of years ago, and Michael Lewis was at that dinner, and that was incredible and super lucky. But then I had a different day in November of 2021, and I was out on the West Coast, And it is literally like the dream that you could live as a sort of nerd sports fan, but also just like, people that are incredible and inspiring and bright and just overwhelmingly generous with their time. So I I had basically after breakfast, I got to go to Sam Hinkie's house, and he's an investor. And Sam is also one of the smartest, most thoughtful, and genuinely nice people that you could ever encounter. So I got to meet him out in California, and got 2 amazing hours of advice and him thinking through things and asking very smart questions. And then I crossed the bay and I had lunch with a guy that is also unbelievably smart and generous and funny in Luke Bourne, who longtime Sloan person that produced like EVP papers, and he sort of works with, but is a partner to this guy named Billy Bean.
Yeah, I've heard of that guy.
Yeah.
Well, I've heard of Luke Bourne too.
And so we talked about soccer and about everything, and Billy is exactly as you hear him, and the stories that come out in Moneyball are real stories. They're not like made up or exaggerated for effect. Like, this is Billy living his life. And so Luke's incredible, Sam's incredible, and obviously getting to meet Billy Bean in person and have lunch with them one time, like, out of this world. And then I drove down to Big Sur for the first time. And honestly, you cannot encompass a better day than that particular day as the life of a sports nerd.
That is incredible. I think, most people remember Moneyball for innovation and analytics and yada, yada, yada. I think a lot of people miss the fact that half the book is about how Billy Bean is a con artist and how he completely, built, just stole a lot of players, like players that he wanted from 29 other GMs in the sport. Like, that's a huge part of the book, which Michael Lewis.
Here's the incredible thing, though. It didn't impact his success. Like, if you look at future years, the A's are still doing that stuff. And so even when they knew it, they were still finding edges and ways to get into the playoffs on this tiny budget. Like, that is the more remarkable element of that story. Like, yes, Moneyball's here and it's way back then. And you're like, yeah, sure, okay. But then what normally happens is everybody finds out about your edge and you can't do it anymore. And that did not stop Billy Bean in the A's. And that tells you how incredible above and beyond that story it actually is.
Absolutely. And Bourne and Bean, they own Toulouse. Is that the team in France?
Yeah, so Toulouse, Billy's been on the board at AZ Alkmaar for a long time. And in fact, I think their director is a guy named Robert Eenhoorn, who used to be a Major League Baseball player. And AZ have sort of punched way above their weight for quite a long time. And then they just recently took over AC Milan.
Oh, they did? Okay, wait, how recent?
Over the summer.
Over the summer. Okay, so we're starting to see some. I don't know how is Milan doing?
So last year, Milan won a title off of the back of some very smart people helping retool it. Many of whom are friends of mine. Some of whom were young proteges. Other whom a guy named Henrik Almstad. So they had good advice, and then they came back on the market, and Red Bird, Red Ball, whatever their entity is, took them over.
Ted Knutson, thank you so much for joining me on this episode of the Football Analytics Show. Please let everyone know where they can find you on Twitter and all of your work at StatsBomb.
I am at Mixed Knuts, so KNUTS, on Twitter, and StatsBomb is statsbomb.com. You'll see our Twitter handle is also at StatsBomb. Lots of stuff around the World Cup, lots of free data out there if you want to go play with some data on our GitHub. I believe at some point in the next sort of 12 months, so 2023, we will produce a full set of NFL data on our new data spec for people to go play with.
That is incredible. Ted, thanks again. This is Ed Fang, your host for the Football Analytics Show. Thank you so much for listening to that episode with Ted Knutson. I wanted to read to you a passage of Net Gains, the book by Ryan O'Hanlon, in which he quotes Ted. Quote, I think there are 3 phases where data comes and disrupts sports. And the first phase is the natural Moneyball phase. Basically, how do we find better players? And that happens in every sport because that's kind of the biggest cost center. If you can crack that, you can get a big edge early on. That edge is actually fairly maintainable if you start getting better data or better ways to analyze stuff or whatever. So that's phase one. The second phase, how do we play the sport better in a more efficient or winnable way? And that's threes and drives and stuff like that in basketball, or it's finding out that velocity and launch angles are pretty interesting in baseball. But then the third wave is always, all right, we've kind of got an efficient market around players now, and we understand how to play the game in the best way we currently know, although those edges can change over time as we get more and better information. We get better technology will apply. So the third phase is, how do we train the players better? I think soccer is a million miles away from that one right now. Can I teach someone to strike the ball like Messi? If I do, I can have a lot of extra goals a year just off of free kicks because he's so absurd. End quote. I really enjoy that passage because it is both succinct and absolutely true. We've seen a lot of those things happen in other sports, and when I had the author of Astro Ball on, Ben Ryder, he talked about how baseball was moving on to using analytics for developing players. So we see soccer that is quite a bit behind. I really enjoyed that passage. I really enjoyed talking with Ted. You should also check out Net Gains, the book by Ryan O'Hanlon. I've read it. I really loved it. Please go check out all the cool things that they are doing over at StatsBomb. Just a reminder, you can get my free sports betting email newsletter. Go to my site, thepowerrank.com, to sign up for this free service. Once again, my name is Ed Fang, and I will talk to you again soon.